a recognized civil rights leader who has dedicated his career to advocating Muslim civil rights in New Jersey. As the executive director, Salahuddin leads a team of dedicated professionals and guides CAIR New Jersey as it seeks to enhance the understanding of Islam, encourage dialogue, protect civil liberties, empower American Muslims, and build coalitions that promote justice and mutual understanding. Salahuddin received his master's degree in Islamic studies with a specialization in the pre-modern convergence of Sufism and Islamic political theory from Columbia University, mashallah, and his bachelor's degree in religious studies from New York University. Salahuddin traveled to Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, and throughout the Balkans in pursuit of traditional studies of Islam and Muslim societies. Salahuddin is a recognized civil rights leader who has dedicated his entire career to advancing Muslim civil rights in New Jersey. As the executive director, Salahuddin leads, this is repeating itself. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Salahuddin.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair for coming.
Thank you. You're welcome. Jazakallah khair. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam rasulillah. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay. Bismillah. Okay, alhamdulillah. Thank you, Islam, and thank you, MCGP, for having me, for having CAIR here today to talk about our civil rights and advocacy work that our chapter is doing around the current issue in Palestine. Alhamdulillah, I really appreciate it when in Masajid they take time and they make space for these topics to be discussed in the community. The fact that it is valued and appreciated and that there is a concrete effort being made to have these discussions in our community spaces is a really important step. Alhamdulillah. So once again, shout out to the masjid and the leadership and the team and the volunteers that organize these gatherings and these events to make sure that we are educated, we are communicating, that we are here in community. Being in spaces like this is an opportunity for us to also heal, right? Because a lot is going on and it can be chaotic. Fear, anxiety, and stress can be very high for a lot of us. So the fact that we get to carve out some time in our week to be here in a space like this, to be in community, allows for us to heal together, to exchange hugs and smiles, and be in each other's presence is very important. So alhamdulillah, jazakumullah khairan to everyone here at MCGP and the leadership for making this happen. Bismillah. So I'll speak a little bit about CAIR and what we've been doing these past 5 weeks now, and I'll speak briefly about what we anticipate moving forward, and then I'll also leave it for Q&A, inshallah. Okay, Bismillah. So many of you are very familiar with CAIR, right? The Council on American Islamic Relations. CAIR, for those that don't know, is America's largest and oldest Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization. It is very similar to the NAACP or the ACLU, but of course its advocacy work is focused on uplifting the American Muslim community. It has about 35 chapters across the country, and alhamdulillah, we work out of the New Jersey location. We have chapters in most major cities across the country, with our DC office being the headquarters. So CAIR's work breaks up into roughly 3 categories. You have the civil rights, which is the bread and butter of what CAIR does, right? The legal services that we offer to the community for anyone that's facing discrimination, harassment, intimidation in all sectors of public life. And then you have the political advocacy work or the civic engagement. And this is encouraging and empowering our community at a local level to be involved in the political process. And that involves multiple different channels and avenues to make a difference at a local level. And then the third category is the media work, right? The being involved in the media is important if we want to have an influence on our nation, whether it's at a local level or at a national level. So to begin with the civil rights work, right? Typically our office, between last year and this year, on average, we would receive 2 to 4 calls a week from community members who are looking for an attorney to speak to consult about a case they might be facing, right? These past 5 weeks, we're getting about 30 calls a week. So it went from 2 to 4 a week to 30 calls a week. So it's a crazy jump, and we are inundated to the point where we are now having to refer cases out to volunteer attorneys and to the national office and to anyone who can really help at this point. And the cases vary. So like I mentioned earlier, across all sectors of public life, we're talking school bullying, and not just peer-to-peer, but teachers being the instigators, or parents being the ones who are actually harassing students. We have cases where parents have taken photos of students waving the Palestinian flag, posting it on social media, intimidating them and their family members to the point where the student doesn't feel comfortable going back to the class the next day. We have cases, of course, in employment discrimination. We had a physician who was literally terminated from his job because a Zionist senior physician at the hospital pressured the administration to terminate him because of his social media posting on Palestine. And the hospital basically caved very quickly, and almost overnight, he lost his job. After a couple of weeks with our attorney, we were able to, alhamdulillah, get his job back. So that was really a big win for us. We were really proud to be able to help that doctor. That happened in New Jersey. And then there are other cases where students on campus, are facing issues. They have medical school students who are under review by the dean, again, for just posting in support of Palestine. And mind you, not posting anything outlandish or unusual. Usually what they're posting are things that maybe many of you and myself included have also posted, like things that have gone viral, that so many have posted. And because of that, they are under review, they are losing their jobs, they're being kicked out of residency programs, and all sorts of things. We're also seeing public harassment and intimidation. So, it's very sad and unfortunate, but of course, right, the sisters, because they wear hijab, they are visibly a target. And we have a couple of cases where in broad daylight, the hijab is pulled right off. We have a case out of Jersey City. We have one case out of Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And I think there's a third case I'm forgetting about. Yeah, and then there are many more, of course. And, issues with tenants and landlords and so on. This has been very overwhelming, but we are doing our very best to offer people legal advice and guidance. So very briefly, if you have experienced anything, small or big, we encourage you to report that to our office. Now, let me tell you why. And I'll go into this a little bit more later, inshallah. But we operate and we live in a democracy, right? And democracies rely heavily on statistics, data, numbers, right? In order to make an influence and make an argument with a politician, you need to be able to show numbers. Because at the end of the day, what do they care about? Votes. And if we don't have the numbers to back up our stories or to showcase the strength of our community, then we will be sidelined, right? So, what am I getting at here? If we don't show that there is an uptick in anti-Muslim discrimination, then the FBI won't care. And we actually spoke to FBI agents earlier this week, and they told us that 75% of the cases of discrimination that they're getting right now is from the Jewish community. And only 25% is coming from the Muslim community. Now, we all know that we are also subject to a lot of the discrimination, but our community doesn't report it as much as the Jewish community does. So that results in the FBI and politicians and other government agencies saying, hey, you're just not experiencing the discrimination you're talking about. It's all fluff. It's all just talk, right? So they need to see numbers. So that's why it's so important that people report things to our office so that we can draw a picture of what we are collectively experiencing. And we have all sorts of things, even something small, like say I have a mother from Montclair who was walking just on the sidewalk with her 2 children, and someone from their car shouted as they were driving by, you are a terrorist, a few slurs, and then drove off, right? There's nothing that can be done in that particular case. There is no recourse. There is nothing that really we could do, because the fact of the matter is that is that person's right to say those horrific things, no matter how horrible they might be. It's their freedom of speech, right? It's ugly, it's disgusting, we don't want to hear it, we don't want to be subject to it, but it is their right. So there's nothing we can actually do, but it is still a hate incident, and that should be accounted for, right? So if you experience something like that, I would encourage you to contact our office. And again, you might not be able to pursue it, but it's still worth noting in our system so that we can publish those numbers and we can show that our community is subject to the discrimination. Although the FBI might not know it, we have clearly seen it and we've documented it. So documentation and numbers are really, really important, especially when media reaches out to us, right? Since day one, the media has been asking us for numbers. How many numbers, how many calls are you getting? How many incidents of hate are you getting, right? And so in order to convey our story to them, we need to have numbers. So I always make this a point to stress to the community to at least report it to our CAIR New Jersey office so we can do our best to document this moment. So we can look back in history and see what was occurring, right? What happened here. Okay, so moving on to government and advocacy work, right? The political advocacy work that CAIR does is multifaceted, right? So the New Jersey chapter focuses on the state of New Jersey. So we work from Board of Education, the lowest tier of government, bipartisan, all the way up to Governor Phil Murphy. And we communicate with the elected officials, letting them know where our community stands. What is our stance on this crisis that they have sidelined our opinion since day one, right? So communication is done in multiple ways, and many of you have probably participated in that communication, whether it is through emails, phone calls, in-person meetings, protests even. These are all channels and avenues through which our democracy affords us, right? These are the rights that we have as citizens of this country, and that we should not belittle that privilege, that opportunity that we have before us, right? These are civil rights that many Muslims across the world might not have. Muslims in Palestine definitely don't have, right? Muslims in Kashmir or India or other parts of the Muslim world, they don't have these privileges and these rights. We are afforded these privileges and these rights. Let us not overlook that. Let us not overlook that unique opportunity that we have before us to make a difference. It is very easy to say, oh, it's just one vote, not going to make a difference. Just one phone call, not going to make a difference. One email is not going to make a difference. It does. It adds up. Back to the concept of numbers, right? Numbers add up. So to give you a quick story, I spoke very briefly with a staff member of an elected official, a congressional representative from New Jersey. And they were talking about a different crisis a while back, unrelated to our community. And essentially what they do in times of crisis when people are calling their office is they literally tally on the whiteboard. I have 30 people calling in support of this side, and I have maybe 29 people calling in support of the other side. They just tally back and forth for like a week until the calls die down, and they assess what did they receive, how many calls, what were people saying, And they take all of that information, they put it into a report, and they give it to the elected official. And they said, this is what the constituency has been communicating to us. And then that is taken into consideration. Is that gonna, be the final, end all be all? No, it's a part of the efforts, right? It's not gonna change the politician's mind just through 1 week of phone calling. We obviously know that because we've been doing this for 5 weeks, and clearly it didn't change things right away. But we're gonna get to how slow the process is. But it is important. It is so important to communicate, because here's the other thing too. Many times we might think that politicians might be malicious and have some sort of secret agenda that they're working towards. And in some cases, yes, they do have an agenda that they are pushing. But in some cases, there is just a great deal of ignorance and being naive, especially at the local level. So to give you an example, we had a superintendent. Now, a superintendent is not an elected position, but the superintendent is put into their position by the Board of Education, right? So the superintendent, who has authority and power and influence over the school district, right, and impacts our children, we had one superintendent call our office. And this is maybe a week or two into the crisis. And he called our office and he basically said, look, I am getting bombarded by Zionists in my township to issue a statement condemning Hamas, not to mention anything before October 7th, and clearly one-sided, right? But I know that there is more to this story, right? I know that your community, the Muslim community, has a perspective, right? And I want to know, if I were to craft this statement, what would I have to incorporate to strike a balance? And we really appreciated that, right? The fact that he would call us, asking us for guidance so he can write something that would respect his Muslim constituents and his Jewish constituents, right? And the students. So we took the time to send him some sample language that we would like to see in his statement in order to create and foster a more welcoming environment for all of his students, right? And that was great. That was a great interaction, and we would wish that every interaction would be like that all politicians or anyone in positions of power or authority would reach out to us asking us for guidance. So that was, alhamdulillah, awesome to see, and very, we, at a time when we were so low and we felt so helpless and hopeless, it was very uplifting to see that there are many people out there that know there is more to this story than meets the eye. There is more to the story than the media might be pushing. So it's so important to communicate to people who have authority, people who are in positions of leadership, right? Writing letters to them, emails. Whenever you see an email action alert, don't think, it's just one little action alert, one email, not gonna make a difference. No, these things go a long way. So when you see the AMP email, when you see a CAIR email, when you see Jewish Voice for Peace, and they have the templates that are ready there for you to use it. Use it. And then you can unsubscribe later. I think that's a big fear that everyone has, is right? They don't want too many emails. But really, this is one way that we can make a difference, by communication, right? This is what politicians want. They want to hear from us. I had one politician who, I know he wasn't being truthful and honest with me when he said this, but this is what they say to us. They say, oh, we haven't heard from your community. We didn't know you wanted XYZ, like ceasefire and humanitarian aid. Now, of course, we're thinking to ourselves, of course you know we want a ceasefire. Of course you know we want humanitarian aid. We've been on the streets shouting this for weeks. But in his eyes, no one came to him and told him directly. So a lot of times they wait for someone in the community to come to them and communicate this directly to them. And until that moment happens, until that communication and that conversation happens, they won't always act, right? So it requires a conservative effort to actually sit down with them sometimes, whether it's over Zoom or in person, to say, hey, this is what we're asking for. This is what we're looking for. This is how many numbers we have in your district. This is something we demand, and there are protests happening left and right. Please make this happen. And then at that point in time, now you can hold them accountable because you've just spoken to them directly, right? You've just emailed them. You've just called them. You've just sat with them. And now they cannot say, oh, no one called me. No one emailed me. I didn't know. No one said anything, right? So they have no excuse. And a lot of times they do use that excuse. So we have to communicate, express ourselves, because God knows that the Zionists in our community are working overtime to pressure those in authority, to pressure them to terminate their employees that speak up against, or to speak out against Israel, to let go of students that might be active on campus, and so on. Doxing is really an issue we're seeing now. Throwing out the personal information of students, employees, in order to intimidate and fear people, scare people from speaking out. So this is an issue that our community is wrestling with. So moving from civic engagement to media. So media is oftentimes referred to as the fourth branch of government. Right? Why? Because the influence that the media wields, right? The influence the media has on the public discourse, the narrative that is shaped, the conversations that are had is done on TV, in the articles that we're reading, on the radio that we're listening to, on social media. This is happening in the public, and it is often shaped by the headlines that we're reading. So it is so important not only to be reactive to a crisis, but to be proactive. So one of the first things that we did October 7th was a Saturday. It happened in the morning, right? I woke up, I remember waking up that Saturday morning, looking at the news on my phone. One of the first things that I did to assemble the team was to email all the elected officials in the Assembly and the Senate saying, this is happening, and we know within the next few hours or a couple of days, your office is going to issue a statement. But before you do that, at least consider our point of view, right? Our side. And we put together a very quick template of suggested language, and we basically were feeding that to them, right? Giving them that language. They can just copy and paste for their own use. So that's a proactive effort we tried to do from the very beginning. Same thing with the media. When a journalist is going to write a story, they have to hear our perspective. So what do we do at CAIR? Well, we issue press releases. We host press conferences. And we establish relationships with journalists and reporters so that they can come to us knowing that we are a trusted source on the Muslim community more broadly. So offering comments, right? Offering simple quotes and getting it out there in front of the journalists in their inbox. So when they write a story about Gaza, when they write a story about Islamophobia, when they write a story about university protests or what have you, they know where we stand. They know how we think. They know what we care about. And it's so important to communicate that to them because they are the ones who will print it, publish it, and if there's no Muslim voice in that article or in that TV episode, then we don't exist. In the eyes of the public, our opinion is totally sidelined, right? And that's what happened in the first week. Totally sidelined. One-sided statements, one-sided articles, one-sided interviews. The Muslim community, the Palestinian community, the Arab community just didn't exist. No regard for that community's suffering, for that community's beliefs or perspective. And it was overwhelming. And it still is overwhelming. There was a great feeling of helplessness. We felt like all of the work that we've been doing post 9/11 in government, in media, all the relationships we've built, it felt like it didn't yield us anything. So it was extremely disappointing. And it still is disappointing to think about. But here's the one thing I want to get to. I was thinking a lot about the advocacy work that we're doing. And it's the sad truth is that nothing we do today will yield what we're really looking for, because it's not going to happen overnight. And although we think we have put in a lot of work in our local communities to address this proactively, we have, but it's not nearly as much work as the Zionist lobby has put in. The decades of lobbying, the decades of the generational wealth and the generational efforts that have been done by the Zionist lobby, by the Zionist community in America, is well before our efforts ever started or were a thought, right? The Muslim community is still very young in that regard. So we have, 2 decades since 9/11 that we have been working overtime to compensate, right, and to fight back the propaganda and the negative rhetoric that our community has been subject to. But don't forget that the Zionist lobby has been doing this well before all of that. So yeah, they are quick, and it was disappointing because I was talking to my Wasim Kanan, who is a good friend of mine at AMP, the American Muslims for Palestine in New Jersey chapter. And while him and I were drafting that email Saturday around noon, October 7th, to the state representatives, him and I were like sitting and thinking, we're drafting this email to the State House, but we know full well that the Zionist lobby is texting the elected officials directly, right? It's like, so we feel so helpless because like, here we are emailing them all through like a BCC, and they might not even see it till Monday, really. But we know that the Zionist lobby, the well-oiled machine that exists and is well-funded, they have individuals who have strong relationships with elected officials and their staff, to the point where they can just get on a phone call or text each and every single one of them, and they are able to get ahead and in front of them quicker than we are. So my point is that it takes time. It's a marathon, and it's not going to happen very quickly. Mayor Mohammed Haidullah of Prospect Park, he always says this, right? He always says civic engagement and advocacy work that we do, it's a marathon, right? It should be considered in this way. We cannot expect to see results of all of the advocacy work that we're doing overnight. Yes, we are loud and we are strong and we are powerful, but we didn't get to this point like in a couple of weeks, right? We have to think about this as a long-term effort that will take generations, not just a couple of years or a few years, but generations. And that's something that we have to keep in mind. Otherwise, we'll feel helpless or hopeless because we feel like we're losing the battle. If we expect to see results quicker, it's not going to work that way. It doesn't work that way. Look how frustrating it is for example, Congressman Bill Pascrell's district in North Jersey in the Patterson area. One of the largest Palestinian communities in the state of New Jersey, right, in his district, and he himself, I don't think he ever issued a statement that would make anyone in this room satisfied or happy. Extremely disappointing. I mean, truly so disappointing. A man who was welcomed into our spaces countless times, invited to countless Eid prayers and iftars and people's homes and all sorts of masajid gatherings. And here he is, absolutely silent on the issue of Palestine. A man whose district has the most Palestinians in the state. Absolutely frustrating. Absolutely frustrating. But why? Because it's well known. It's no secret that the Zionist lobby works hard to pressure Congressman Bill Pascrell. This is no secret to anybody. And this is well known, well documented, and it's also, it's public information how much elected officials receive funding from the Zionist lobby. But I tell you this not to make us feel disappointed or oh, it's helpless cause. What can we do? We can't fundraise them. But no, we still have the world supporting the Palestinian cause. I mean, the world is supporting the Palestinian cause. And here's one thing about advocacy work that is also really important. So when I first started working at CAIR, this was last time Palestine was in the news. I think it was 2021. I believe also overlapping the murder of George Floyd. There were protests for Palestine and BLM. And I gave a speech in, I believe, North Bergen, where I basically said Zionism is racism. That statement, I said that statement. And then I also said, I drew a parallel between the suffering of Palestinians and black people in America. And I said that the knee that is choking the Palestinians is the same knee that is choking black people here in America. And I went on to explain this. Because I said that, I think that was a Friday. Monday morning, I woke up to an article and a tweet from the Anti-Defamation League, which is a Zionist organization, condemning me. They didn't call me anti-Semitic, I don't think, but they basically condemned me. They condemned my statement, and they called on others to condemn me. And so what did I do in response to that, right? My name is being smeared in the public. An organization is publicly attacking me, my reputation, my image, basically calling me anti-Semitic without saying it, and harassing me on social media. So how do I respond? How would any of you respond? So what did I do? We called all of our allies, all of our supporters and our friends, and we were able to put together a coalition, a very diverse coalition of Black, Latino, Jewish, Palestinian, Muslim, secular, a very diverse coalition of organizations and leaders in the New Jersey kind of arena. And they issued a statement, a joint statement in support of myself, of CAIR New Jersey, echoing my original speech. We published that in response to their condemnation of me. And that is a big deal. And so later that week, I found out, a couple of things happened. So later that week, I got a phone call from Governor Phil Murphy's office. And Governor Phil Murphy's office, at the time, his staff member, a senior staff member, called and said, basically expressed disappointment that I was able to build up a coalition and respond to the ADL's condemnation of me. And they said, why did you do that? Why didn't you just come to us and we could have resolved this basically behind closed doors? And I'm saying to myself, they just condemned me publicly, and you want me to come to you behind closed doors so that you can do what? Slap them on the wrist, right? I have the right to defend myself publicly, and you're telling me to be quiet. Absolutely not. The governor's office, I later found out, the governor's office was being pressured by Zionist organizations to publicly condemn me. But the governor couldn't do that, because if he did, he would be condemning a very strong, broad coalition that came out in support of me. So he wouldn't put himself in that position, right? So my point in telling you this story is allies, friends, organizations and people and community, having them behind you, stand by you, is so important in getting the work done, right? And the Palestinian cause is an example where so many people from all areas and the diversity and backgrounds are supportive of the efforts. And that is what makes it so difficult to silence, right? Our voice is loud because we have the numbers. Again, going back to the concept of democracy. Democracy is about numbers. And as a minority community, we need to build allies and friendships. We need to establish channels of communication and build bridges with other minority communities and organizations, right? Without compromising our values, without compromising our beliefs and our morals, we can still build friendships with other marginalized communities to advocate for ourselves, right? And to have the numbers that are needed to be heard and seen. Because it is so easy, too easy, for politicians and the media to quickly dismiss us, to quickly sideline us, and basically not care for us because we don't have the numbers, we don't have the visibility. But you build a platform, you build a stage when you have a broad coalition. And when you have that broad coalition, they can't silence you. They can't, right? Because there are so many who are standing by you. So I think that's what the Palestinian cause has going for it. It is that diverse coalition, that diverse effort that supports it. And if you look at who supports, if you think back to January, the insurrection on January 6th or 7th, I'm forgetting the date. 6th? Okay, January 6th. Does anyone remember the flags that were being flown that day, in the crowd that day? There was the American flag, and there were two other flags. I didn't hear. No. No. In the crowds, in the people who were invading the Capitol. Israeli flag, and there was also a Confederate flag. Yes, I think a foreign nation, India. I believe it was India and the Israeli flag. Yeah, that speaks volumes, right? Zionism and Hindutva, they're parallel, right? So you see who is in that camp and who is in our camp, and this is important to observe. When we're understanding the political arena that we have now entered into, we need to know who are our friends, who are our allies, and the Zionists. Who is supporting the Zionist cause? I can't remember exactly who it was from India, but I remember watching a video, an elected official from India, basically throwing their support behind the Zionist movement and behind Israel's aggression in Gaza. And it's not surprising, because Hindutva is no different, right? The political ideology of Hindutva, the politicization of the Hindu religion, and its adoption by the nation state of India is no different than Zionism and its adoption by the Israeli government and its weaponization of Judaism against the indigenous population of the Palestinians. So these things, they are important to understand. And we need to know who are we working with and who is working against us. So I want to be mindful of time. I think I can maybe open it up for questions and answers, maybe? Okay, yeah. Yeah, there's the first 10 I saw. So. Mm-hmm. You had to get it reinstated, and then this is injustice, and there was some way you were able to work it around with the corporation. Then what was the penalty for the corporation for causing this kind of stress for the physician? Is this any penalty and corporation? Okay. So the physician, basically, long story short. The physician posted, yeah. Oh, repeat the question. Okay. So the question was about the physician who was terminated from Hackensack Hospital, correct? And how we were able to get his job back. And maybe you can elaborate a little bit more, on what grounds were we able to get his job back? Yeah, so what were the grounds? What's the parameter in which if you stay, you can fight your case, number one. And number two, is there any, a payback for the corporation for doing this to somebody? Yeah. Okay, so in that particular case, we actually were able to get half of pay for the few weeks that he was unemployed. So we weren't able to get full pay for those 2 weeks, but we were able to get half pay. So he was compensated for that time. It's not ideal, but it was something. But let me say this before I answer the question. So every case is different because there are multiple factors at play. So it's really hard to give broad legal advice. And before I do give broad legal advice, disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, right? So if you want to speak to a lawyer and you have a case that you're currently wrestling with, I would encourage you to call our office. And then you can speak to our attorney, Ayazaki, who is dealing with multiple cases like this herself. So while I don't usually give legal advice, I can say this, that, I forgot that was there. Every case is different, for so many reasons, right? Because it could be about what was posted. It could be about, your position there. How long have you been there? Who is the offending party? There are multiple factors. Where is the place of employment? It could be a hospital, it could be other places. I mean, if you're a teacher, the argument against you might be different because you might be impacting students. We have a lot of cases with teachers who might be losing their jobs because they also are posting in support of Palestine. Do you have a union rep supporting you? Another question to take into consideration. So it's very hard to kind of give legal advice per se for someone. But generally speaking, there's something I'm going to say that's going to be a little bit disappointing to hear, but political speech is not protected speech per se, because it's not a protected class, right? So you have the freedom to practice your religion, and you cannot be discriminated against on the basis of your race, religion, gender, national origin, etc. But political speech is not protected. So it does make it actually a bit difficult for the attorney to defend the client who was terminated for political speech. Employers do basically have the right to terminate people for really any reason besides the protected classes, right? They can't terminate you because you're black or because you're Muslim or because of these protected classes, but they can terminate you because maybe they don't like you. They can do that, right? Unfortunately, that's how it is. But employers are responsible for making sure that their workspace and their environment is not hostile to Muslims or to just their employees. So they shouldn't be issuing one-sided statements that might ostracize specific people. So for example, we have one case where there was a sister who was Muslim in a brokerage firm, and in the brokerage firm, there was a team Zoom call with I think nearly 100 people on this Zoom call. And openly on this Zoom call, 4 of the most senior, staffers at the brokerage firm basically made very derogatory comments, basically calling Palestinians animals, barbaric, and making an inappropriate comment about Muslims, right? Just openly and casually on this Zoom call with almost 100 people. And mind you, there's maybe only 4 or 5 Muslims working at this brokerage. So the Muslim who is listening and observing to this is in shock, right, at the audacity and just the open racism that's being spewed on this Zoom call. She leaves the call crying, devastated. She's like, this is a place I work at, right? And it's clearly a hostile environment for me as a Muslim. What do you do? So she was brave and she wrote this beautiful, articulate email to the senior-most officials at the brokerage firm, expressing her concern and disappointment in the comments that were made and that no one stopped those comments or dismissed them or called them out, and said that you as employers have a responsibility to make sure that the workspace is not hostile, is not toxic, and it's not a place where people feel like they're threatened or unwanted or unwelcomed. And to our surprise, they immediately responded, literally within, I think, 10 minutes, they said, positively. They're like, yeah, you're right, Fatima, that was wrong. And that should have been, called out immediately. Now, they had their excuses as to why they didn't call it out. One said he didn't hear, one said he was, had his camera off, and, a few other things, whatever it might be. But basically, they responded positively, and then they said, what would you like for us to do? So they put the ball in her court. And then she came to us and said, well, what should I do? So they gave her a few options. They said we can either terminate them, we can revoke their license, or we can do both, or we can do nothing. I think there might have been a fifth option. I can't remember. So right now, I think the wish is that their license be revoked and that they be terminated, because that language can't be tolerated, especially if you're working with people, right? And you're trying to assist the public, knowing full well that you are openly racist in this way, your license should be revoked. So I think that's what they're looking to do in this case. But in cases where, like the doctor, for example, is facing retaliation for his posts, it's difficult. And I think, like I said, it varies from case to case. And I would speak to Aya for more legal advice. It's really upsetting because I never want to make anyone feel like they can't be vocal on social media, and that they feel like they have to, be afraid or walk on eggshells when they're posting on social media. And my one advice would be is to just share trusted content, to share reliable resources, right? To share news articles, and to share information that is coming from organizations or entities that they vet the information, and not just sharing like viral stuff that might be emotional or might also be false. There's a lot of misinformation out there. So it's important for us to be mindful of what we share online, and do so strategically and with purpose, because it could hurt you depending on where you're at. I hate to say that, but that's just the reality that we live in, and I don't want to make anyone feel like they shouldn't post online, because we don't want them to silence us, but at the same time, we have to be mindful of what we're putting out there. And then even, a part of me also says, because I heard there's one story where, a case that we actually had, where an individual posted a news article, I think from MSNBC, and the posting of that article ended them up in like the review by the dean. So it's like nothing is good. Nothing we do is good enough, right? Not even an MSNBC article is safe. So it is an unusual time, and it is difficult, but yeah. There's a lot of. I know I saw your hand up there.
So I'm from India, and I'm part of one of the groups where there are like very few Muslims on that group. It's pretty much a Hindu group, and I see a lot of bad information said about Muslims, Quran, a lot of false and fake articles. Initially, I started to defend that, but it's just overwhelming. How do you can you report them? Number one. I basically threatened them that I'm going to report them, but I don't know who to report it. It's just a threat in the air. But
Yeah.
how do we defend that? Or also, even if without defending, is there a way I can report them, or should I just let it go?
I understand. So, I mean, this is like a beauty, but also a challenge, right? Like, we have the right to basically say or do anything as long as we don't infringe on someone else's rights. So people can say horrible things, right? And it's not something we want to hear, right? But people can say and post horrible things and even lies and propaganda and, be insulting to Islam and Muslims. And unfortunately, there is no avenue through which we can, address this besides educating, right? That's really the only thing we can do. Even the mother who, for example, she was just walking on the sidewalk and she was called a terrorist and, go back to your country, right in front of her by this other woman who was driving her car. There's really nothing that can be done in that particular case, right? It's a verbal harassment, but you can't arrest that offender. She didn't commit a crime. What she did was hateful and disgusting and wrong, and we don't want that to happen to anyone. But it's not something that we can report per se, unfortunately. What's that? Physical, that's different. So when you are physically assaulted, that is not okay. So that is when you get law enforcement involved. whether it's in the public, at work, at school, or whatever it is. Physical assault, even like physical intimidation, like if someone's not hitting you, but they're physically intimidating you, that also could potentially be reported to law enforcement. But I would encourage you to educate. Use that chat as an opportunity to. Yeah, that's the best way. That's all we can do in a case like that. But yeah, I want to give it to one of the sisters, and I'm gonna. Yes.
So, what do you suggest for someone who wears hijab, the only hijabi in the setting, like the hospital setting or wherever they work, and under Jewish management?
Mm-hmm.
And if they feed hatred, not from Jews, from different community, what do you suggest for them? It is very hard to work like that every single day, being hated. I can see, literally, every single day.
Yeah. It is very it is very challenging, and I actually have my aunt. She works in I guess a fashion company, a clothing company in New York City, where all of her the leadership and the ownership of the company are all Jewish, all Zionist, very openly Zionist. And it was interesting in her case. Her boss came to her one day, because her boss knows she's Muslim, and said, Leila, I want to talk to you about, the current crisis. And, this can go in many different directions. I mean, some bosses might be open and willing to speak about these things with their employees. Others might not be. They might be apprehensive. They might, not wish to talk about it at all. Maybe they're contributing to a hostile environment. So it goes multiple ways. In her case, she's lucky to have an employer who, although he is Zionist, understands that not everyone thinks in the same way he does, and allowed for her to express herself to him openly without fear of retaliation. She's very lucky to have that. A lot of people don't, as you just explained, right? You feel unsafe, and you feel like you don't know what to do in a setting like that. So it is challenging, and I don't know if I have an answer that you're looking for. It is difficult, and I think the best thing that we can do as Muslims is to continue to persevere and be optimistic, and also just be the best that we can be in these spaces. A lot of times our actions can speak volumes in a way that our words can never really do the things that we want them to. I don't think we're going to be able to convince people to think the same way that we do through one conversation. I think it's a relationship that is built over years. That is what's going to change hearts and minds. And if you work in an environment where you feel like it's hostile, depending on how hostile it is, if you feel like you truly are, unsafe, and you don't feel like you're welcomed because of maybe a particular comment that was made or an action that was taken, and you feel like you're being ostracized, and there's an effort to do that, then you call us, right? But yeah, I hope that makes sense. But yeah.
Jazakallah khair for that very enlightening talk and thoughts and ideas. I just want to share a couple of incidents. One, I received a message from a local community member whose wife works at a school district in Mercer County, and the school district had sent out an email that was one-sided to all families. So she was distressed, but she didn't know what to do, and she was afraid and all that stuff. So I told him I suggest that she goes and she speaks to the superintendent.
Yeah.
I think what they did, they decided to write kind of like an anonymous email, because they did not want to be known. But then I called the superintendent myself. I don't live in that school district. I called and I said, I'm a community leader. I got this complaint, and I'm concerned. So initially, the superintendent was out of town. She called me when she was coming back to town. She spoke to me for 40 minutes, which is very generous actually. actually.
Yeah.
But this is what she said. She said that, okay, I have to admit, you're right. You started that way. She said the email was wrong. And she said, I sent the email because I was pressured by Jewish families,
Exactly.
but no Muslim family reached out to me.
Exactly.
And um, and she said, I totally apologize. I will correct it. I will send out another email that is more balanced. But then she said, you know what, since I have you on the phone, I want to do more in the school district. Would you mind taking part in an in-service for the teachers to, educate them about the situation? I said, for sure. Then she said, would you mind helping with doing some presentations to the students about the history? I said, for sure. She said, great. We'll do that together. I have other ideas also to work on.
Yeah.
So that's a part of the story. I'm just going to finish another story very quickly. I also was contacted by an MSA at the high school. It's actually the high school in Montgomery. The MSA reached out to me and they wanted me to do a presentation to them. I went, and the principal was there, the assistant principal was there, and the school counselor was there. And alhamdulillah, it went very well. The principal was very happy, and she said, we want to have you back in here.
Nice.
So I'm saying this is that because I want us to be proactive and not just wait till people say things about us and then we start complaining. And when we see something wrong, don't assume that we cannot correct it. A lot of times it's an easy correction. You may not even care for it. You should report it to CAIR. But it could be resolved by a phone call, a discussion, or a meeting with the principal or the superintendent or so.
Yeah, actually, to that point, I want to say, there are a lot of people who actually ended up apologizing for their initial statements. Even the governor himself, when we spoke to him directly over the phone, he admitted that his initial postings on the crisis were one-sided, and he said, we got it wrong. That was his words, we got it wrong. So yeah, a lot of people were acknowledging that they got it wrong. But why did they get it wrong? They didn't just wake up and decide to write that statement. It's because they received an enormous amount of pressure, phone calls and emails from the Zionist community. We need to do the same thing, proactively. But yeah.
If I can just make one comment and another thing.
Yeah.
Can we please arrange a workshop within a civil rights attorney? Because we are raising our voice and we want to know where the parameters are to play the game, like it's very sad. So we can keep advocating for Palestine and not leave any room. So somebody can come and do like a talk with us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What we do is there's called a legal clinic where we bring the attorney in to talk to people individually about cases. And there's basically like a line, the attorney comes, they speak to them about the case, the attorney gives the legal advice, and then they can go like one by one. That's usually the best way if people are looking for actual legal advice to address any like employment or what have you, but we can definitely organize that, inshallah. Yeah, do we have it?
Yes, so my question is about activism, I'm in high school, and then whenever I bring up, pre-Palestine or whatever, the immediate response is like, oh, what about Hamas, what about FMS? So it's like, how do I sort of rebuttal that? How do I respond to that? Because, it's really hard to talk about it without offending people. So how do I respond to Hamas?
So the H word has always thrown around, right? It's thrown in our face, and it's like, whoa, what about them? What about Hamas? What about this? What about that? And it's happened pretty much in almost every interview that we've had with local outlets and even elected officials, right? They always make mention of this. But really, it's not complicated, and it's never complicated. It's just selective, tunnel vision that some elected officials or media outlets might have. And that is, the story did not start on October 7th, right? And there is a greater story to this that needs to be told, right? And the violence that the Palestinians are facing has been happening for 75 years. And their story needs to be told. That story needs to be illustrated to the media through real life, stories of how families have been impacted. Last year, we got a few phone calls from Palestinian Americans who had their homes basically desecrated vandalized in the West Bank, right? And we were communicating this to the elected officials at the time. I remember we were communicating it to a few representatives. We were saying, this is happening right here. Your own constituents have property in the West Bank and family in the West Bank, and they're being harassed by illegal settlers, and their property is being damaged and vandalized. So this story spans well before October 7th. And we're taking these stories and we're communicating that to journalists and reporters and politicians, letting them know that Hamas didn't just wake up October 7th and thought maybe they should just do this thing that would absolutely lead to devastation, right? Hamas has been led to feel as if they have no option left, right? They live in a blockade. We all know. How many times have we heard it before, right? This is the reality that they have been left with. But again, it's a history that needs to be told. That story needs to be told. And that's what our job is, to convey that story. Our job is to be their voice, because they don't have a voice here. We are their voice. We are their voice in the media, with elected officials. Yeah.
Okay, brothers and sisters, please try to keep your comment very short. We have a lot of questions. And inshallah, we're going to repeat this again, but in order to give everybody a chance to ask the question. We don't want lectures. If you have a comment, keep it to 30 seconds, please.
Assalamu alaikum. The question, if the FBI stops somebody and requests to talk to him, what's the right course to take? Talk with him or request a lawyer?
Always request a lawyer. Thank you for asking that question. We actually, it's so unfortunate that I have to say this, but it is the reality of the situation that we're currently facing. We have reason to believe that the FBI will begin putting more of an effort into looking into our community. And that's just not just me saying that. That's because I have been in conversations with law enforcement and the FBI that have basically spelt it out to us. So I don't say this to scare everyone, but I just say this to let everyone understand what we're dealing with right now. And we have seen a couple of cases with the FBI and community members here in New Jersey. And our advice is very simple. If you are contacted by the FBI, do not speak to the FBI without an attorney present. So you always call our office, and we will have an attorney with you, whether they are over the phone or they are in person. The FBI usually tries to meet with people in person. Like, they'll call you or they'll email you even, and they'll say, hey, we want to meet, ask you a few questions. Respond very simply, very respectfully, very kindly. I will not speak to anyone in law enforcement, FBI, or any government agency without my lawyer next to me. And then you can call us and we can provide our lawyer to you, or you can, of course, contact a lawyer of your own, but we encourage you to have a lawyer. And I cannot say that enough, because we have cases where someone basically would speak to the FBI without a lawyer present, and then they were giving, the client was giving the FBI all these names of people that they know and family and friends, and I kid you not, that same FBI agent went to literally the other cousins and family members of that individual, knocked on their door, and asked them many more questions, right? And scary. It's very scary when you have FBI at your door and intimidating you, asking you questions, and you think you're a subject to an investigation. You think you might have committed a crime. What have I done that now warrants the FBI to come to even my place of employment? We have FBI agents going to people's jobs looking for them. So avoid speaking to the FBI without a lawyer. It can be detrimental to you and your family and friends. You have nothing to hide, but you don't want to communicate to them without it being filtered through legal counsel. Yeah. I don't know who's doing the question. Okay.
So you were talking about how like if freedom of speech and all these people are calling Muslims names and all these things. So then how come all organizations, Muslim organizations and non-Muslim organizations are getting sued by the Jews and the Zionists? Like saying that they said this, they said that, if we have freedom of speech and it's
Yeah.
like that.
Okay, so anyone can sue anyone doesn't mean that they're right. So for example, we are suing, well, obviously we've CAIR, more broadly speaking, not our chapter, but some of the national office, for example, was telling us last week that when they bring a lawsuit against the Zionist entity, whatever it might be, whether it's it could be a school district, it could be another organization, it could be any kind of perpetrator, what we're noticing is that Zionist attorneys intercept our lawsuit with another lawsuit, right? So if we're suing someone for discriminating against a Muslim, right, on the basis of their kind of Palestinian identity or their openness on Palestine, a Zionist attorney will come in and sue the Palestinian or the Muslim for discriminating against the other opposing party. And then that delays the lawsuit, and it actually drags out the legal battle, right? So suing left and right, it happens all the time. And just because someone's suing someone doesn't mean that they're always right. It's our right to sue people, but someone's going to lose that battle when it faces a judge. But yeah. Alaikum salam.
May I first say the youths are more of a concern now because that's why I moved to Turkey and also as a living in the high school. And even from the name of the care, we know it's a family. We are family. And that is a full culture, Islam and American. That's the care. Okay. The Palestinians, sincerely, are fighting for their own land. But behind that, they are fighting for Muslim homeland. The Zionists are pushing their agenda. We're not against their agenda. But why are they stopping us from even existing? Okay? They are pushing for protecting Islam, protecting Muslim accent, and every Islamic area. So they are suffering because of we other Muslims, sincerely, and they are being punished. Let's say with it because we are them. We must have a better government for the youth. The question is a straightforward one. The question from there, sincerely speaking, can we be more proactive? People that support us, if they are getting blindsided, blacklisted, can CAIR call the support? The core is the schools that came out, the students that came, can hear the writing publicly that don't discriminate the states. Can the lady in the Congress that is being around, can we talk about that that's responding and it's not going to cause care for anybody in any manner? Okay? So also, this is very important. The congressmen and women we wrote to, can you at least indicate regularly, repeat regularly, we go to XYZ and because we need to call them out.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they will not own up to their responsibility.
Yeah.
And that's a very important thing.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and more broadly with elected officials, for example, one thing we do is we try to stay in touch with elected officials throughout the year, right? So it's not just when we're in times of crisis, right? It's not just now, and then we forget about them later on. There was actually a video that came out, I think I saw it yesterday, a congressional representative from Connecticut. And he says in his video, I don't know the context of the video, he basically says he's received, I think, 7 to 8 in-person visits from the Zionist lobby at his office in Washington, D.C. throughout the year, right? And how many Muslims visited him? 0. 0 Muslims have went to his office to talk to him about our community's concerns. But in 1 year, he gets 7 to 8 visits from the Zionist lobby. So this work It happens year round. It doesn't just happen in times of crisis. Emotions are very high right now, right? And everyone's doing everything they can right now. And WhatsApp is being flooded right now. But in a few months and maybe next year, where are we going to be? We need to think long term, right? The efforts need to happen. It's a marathon, remember? It's a marathon. Yes, go ahead.
Our questions that we're both like school, we're in the same school district, and we're trying to raise awareness about Palestine because we think like everyone in our school supports Israel. So how are we supposed to like raise awareness without getting hate in like MSAs and stuff?
Oh, you have an MSA? You have an MSA. Okay. How long has it been operating for? Okay, so this is the first year you've established it? It's been there for, okay, got it. So it's been there for a while. Okay, mashallah. I'm always impressed when I find, this is a high school, yes? Okay. So it's amazing to hear that there are MSAs in high schools, because I grew up without an MSA in my high school. There's only like maybe 5 or 6 Muslim students in my high school at the time. And now, mashallah, they have an active MSA, so it's great to hear that you have that. That's the first step, right? Alhamdulillah, you have that space. Now, begin expanding, but it requires a degree of courage and optimism and trust in the school leadership, right? So I hope you have healthy relationships with the school administration, and I hope they know who you are, and I hope they value your contribution to the school, right? They should know that this MSA is a vibrant, active club that is of benefit to the school body, right? And they should see that and know that and appreciate that. And then when you do big and bold things, they're gonna say, okay, this group, we respect them and we love them, let's work with them to address any issue that they might be facing. So establish relationships, have friends, contribute to other clubs on the school campus. Don't be afraid, don't feel like you have to be silenced. In the school, you have the most rights, right? In a workspace, it might be different. But in the school, especially in a public school, you can walk around with the Palestinian scarf and you should not feel like you're going to be silenced, because that's the place where you have the most rights. The government cannot silence you. Our rights are to protect us from the government, and you are in a public school, so that should be the safest setting. Go with that, yeah.
Inshallah, we're going to pray Isha, and then